Hey there, my name is Jake McMahon. I am the campus pastor of the Park Hill campus of Restore. And maybe you've seen me before, maybe you haven't. But my face is actually abnormally red to where it normally is. I actually got to spend the last week at a church conference in Orlando, Florida. Snuck away to the beach on one of those days. And I promise you that I put on sunscreen like 3 or 4 times. And that Orlando sun is strong, let me tell you. So I'm rocking a little bit of a sunburn. I'm not angry at you, nothing like that. I just wanted to let you know before we dove into week 3 of a teaching series that we've been in called Discovering God. And I love the title Discovering God. And Theo Davis, he's our digital pastor. He's actually had a hand in writing almost every single one of these weeks. And he was diving into the story of Moses. And as he was diving in, he's like, hey, we could call this series Moses. But as he unpacked it a little bit more, he found that each and every story of Moses really is discovering God. How God moves in not only Moses' story, but how he continues to move in our story. So let me kind of catch you up to where we've been and how we've looked at the story of Moses over the last couple weeks. If you haven't had a chance to yet, would highly encourage you to jump over to our Restore YouTube channel and watch weeks 1 and weeks 2. But if you haven't had a chance to yet, week 1 we talked about God's providence. So God's providence was on display fully in Moses' life really early on as a baby. There was a decree in the nation of Israel, which are currently enslaved by the Egyptian people, that every firstborn son of each family would be put to death. They were growing in such number, and the Egyptians were fearful that they would ultimately take over, so this was the measures that they took as basically population prevention. And so they managed the population this way, but Jochebed, which is Moses' mother, she flees outside the city. She puts Moses in a basket, lays him in the Nile River, and he ends up finding himself on the doorstep of the palace of the Egyptians, specifically the princess, Pharaoh's daughter. And she chooses actually not to kill Moses, an Israelite, in this moment. God's providence is on full display that not only Moses' life was spared, but that he was moving in Moses' life regardless if Moses knew it or not. And then Moses, he grows up inside of the temple, inside of Pharaoh's house. And then we jump on to this moment in Exodus where Moses, inside of his anger and his frustration, he's watching an Egyptian guard beat up one of his fellow Israelites. And he sees it, he gets so frustrated that he ends up killing the soldier, feels like he does it in secret, only to find out later that several other Israelites saw him do this. Fearful that he was going to kill them too, he flees to this town called Midian and escapes from God's justice, Pharaoh's justice. But we get to watch God's justice and his grace on full display. Because he flees to the town of Midian, redemption first begins when he saves his future father-in-law, Jethro's daughters, from a band of shepherds, and he frees them at the well, and he protects them and ends up marrying one of Jethro's daughters, and it's this amazing picture of grace in Moses' life, which now leads us to week 3. And this story is all about God's availability. How God is not only available to us, but he was available to Moses. And we're going to dive into probably the most famous moment in Moses' life. One of the most iconic stories in the Old Testament. It's a story that you've probably heard before, but I'm loving getting to dive into this. I've been preparing for this message because it's really how God shows up in our life and how he shows up in Moses' life in a really supernatural way. And so we're going to see Moses encounter God at the burning bush. But before we dive into this story in Exodus chapter 3, I would love for you to take a look at this story from the Hollywood depiction in the movie The Prince of Egypt. Check it out.
Here I am. Take the sandals from your feet. For the place on which you stand is holy ground. Who are you? I am that I am. I don't understand. I am the God of your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
You were born of my mother, Yocheved. You are our brother.
Now Moses was tending to the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire and it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. Why the bush does not burn up. Curiosity is an intriguing experience that we have as humans. I feel like we're generally curious, but I see this on full display like in the life of kids, in my kids. They're just so curious about what words mean or why people act the way that they do. But this goes as like to small as if my kids, if they see something like shiny on the ground, they're confident it's a quarter or a coin, but they will literally drop everything. They will drop literally everything, and they will go find out what that shiny thing on the ground is. And I don't think that this experience is necessarily unique to kids. As adults, curiosity plagues us regularly. But they're typically more advanced or more mature forms of curiosity on why a certain situation is happening, or why a friend is treating us that way, or trying to learn something new that helps us inform what we believe. Curiosity is a pretty strong thing that we have on a regular basis, and I feel like it's even stronger when it comes to exploring what we believe about God. And this moment that we're going to see is an opportunity for us to reflect on Moses' life. And I think it's pretty clear that drawing near to God provides clarity to our curiosity. What if God is trying to tell you something? What if he's trying to tell you something that you just don't understand? Because there are so many things that we don't understand about God. And what if leaning into that curiosity, drawing near to God in our curiosity, not knowing why a burning bush is not burning up, what if in those moments we get to experience clarity, have things answered for us? Because right here in Exodus chapter 3, verse 4, God is going to speak. It says, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called him from within the bush. Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place that you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Moses draws near to God inside of his curiosity, and then God speaks. But God didn't speak until he saw that Moses had gone over to look. Often I ask myself this question: how do I hear from God? I'm sure you've asked yourself this question before. How do we hear from God? How do I know that God is speaking? How do I know it's just not what Jake's desire is or what Jake wants? How do we know that God is speaking? See, God can communicate to us in a variety of different ways, and I feel like I've experienced many of those personally. God, as we know, is omnipresent. He's all around us. But here, what if this is true, that drawing near to God allows us to hear Him speak? Drawing near to God allows us to hear Him speak. Because God doesn't speak until Moses chooses to draw near to God. I often wonder why God is not speaking to me. I get frustrated, I get challenged, and I'm like, God, where are you? Why aren't you speaking? And we often wonder why, but what if it's because we're not drawing near to Him? What if God is reaching His hand out and saying, I want to provide clarity, I want to speak to you, I want you to hear from me, but we're not extending an arm back to Him. We're not leaning into relationship with Him. We're not putting in the work to dive into prayer, to create space to listen, to engage in Scripture, to allow Him to speak back to us, because He's calling out constantly and we just can't hear Him because we're not drawing in. And we're not drawing near. I feel like the moments that I obviously hear most clearly from God is when I choose to draw near. He's probably already speaking. Maybe I'm just not listening. The story continues in verse 7. Then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land that is flowing with milk and honey. The land where the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Look! The cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abused them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. Right here is where Moses gets his instructions. He gets his instructions on where he's supposed to go, on where he is called, on where he is being sent. So what if drawing near to God can give you clarity on where you're being sent? We just wrapped up Missionary Pathway. Which is a 5-week experience that many of us got to walk through together, of learning about where we're called to be missionaries in our everyday communities. Specifically where we live, work, play, and learn. And the entire foundation of the experience is bathed in the work of prayer. Prayer being the work as a missionary. That spending time in prayer allows us to not only hear from God, but experience clarity on where we're being sent. Not only to who, but to how. I'm regularly praying for, in Missionary Pathway, we call this our few. The few in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, the places that God has called us. And I'm praying for my few. And when I feel like I pray, when I choose to draw near to God, asking Him to send me, I feel like I find a ton of clarity on opportunities to love, to bless, to serve, and to connect in conversation with my neighbors and those that God has called me to reach. Drawing near to him allows us to experience clarity on where we're supposed to be sent. Isaiah, in the book of Isaiah, he's a prophet, and he's having this encounter with God. He's experiencing this vision, and it's so clear as Isaiah is drawing near to God, God kind of gives him this command. He said, all right, so who is going to go? And then Isaiah, in Isaiah 6, verse 8, he says, here I am, Lord, send me. What if God so deeply wants to send you, you just don't know it yet? You haven't chosen to draw near in relationship with him. You haven't chosen to listen or reach the hand back out to him, said, I want to serve you. I want to be a disciple maker. I just don't know where. And he's just asking you to spend some time with him. Where are you at? You might find yourself on one of those three spaces. You might be drawing near to the curiosity of God, asking yourself these questions. Who is God? How can I connect with him? How do I understand the Holy Spirit? How he wants to speak to me? Who is Jesus? What's my purpose in this life? If you are asking these questions, if you're so curious about God, here's a next step for you. It's probably to explore Alpha. You may be joining us online, but we are launching Alpha at our Waldo and our Park Hill campuses coming up here on Wednesday, March 15th. And if you want to, around a dinner table with others, asking these curious questions about God, you can. You can let us know by sending a message in the chat or the comments below, and we'll follow up with you and we'll help you get you connected to an experience that allows you to explore your curious questions about God. Or maybe you just need to draw near to God so that you can hear him speak. So that you can hear him speak to you. I think it's most clearly done through prayer. As we spend time in silence, putting our cares and our burden on him, and we're asking God, just speak to me. Speak to me, God. Or maybe it's time for you to draw near to God so that you can understand where you're supposed to be sent. You can ask him the questions, God, tell him, here I am, Lord, send me and just show me where. Show me how. Give me clarity. Because I believe as we draw near to God in curiosity, clarity is just overwhelming. And he wants to send you. He wants to send me. No matter where you're at, it will require work of you. It will require you to draw near to God. As part of our entire series, we've been having regular memory verses. And this week's memory verse is from James chapter 4. And here's what I would love to do. I would love to read this for you twice. And although I know you're joining us online, I'm not going to be able to hear you obviously recite it with me on the third time, but I'm going to encourage you to do so. So I'll read it twice. I would love for you to just listen, maybe close your eyes and listen to these words and try to memorize and rehearse the words in your head on the third time. We will read it together. It says in James chapter 4, verse 8, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Another time, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Now read it with me together. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Drawing near to God can do a lot of things. It can allow us to provide clarity. It can allow us to hear from him, and we can understand where we're sent. It can also reflect back our sin against us, as James is talking here in James chapter 4. But drawing nearer to God is something he desires for every single one of us. As we lean into relationship with him and we say, God, I want you, I want more of you. But for our relationship to flourish, it will require work on our own part. To lean in and say, yes, God, I'm ready to draw near to you.